If I were to do justice to their bios, we would be here for hours. And so you have a little paragraph in front of you, and I'll briefly describe our panelists. Professor Antonio Damasio is a world-renowned expert. We are very lucky to have him at USC, where he is the David Dornsey Professor of Neuroscience, Professor of Psychology, Philosophy, and Neurology, and founding director of where we sit today, the USC Brain and Creativity Institute. He has made profound contributions to the understanding of brain processes, emotions, and feelings. He is also, as many of you know, a New York Times bestselling author. Professor Beatriz Ilari is an associate professor of music teaching and learning at the Thornton School of Music down the block. She teaches graduate courses in music psychology, the sociology of music, cultural diversity in music teaching, and her extensive research with infants and children musicking, which is a really interesting verb I just learned in preparing for today. Anyway, a lot of research into the way kids and infants respond to music, and has taken her around the world. You've met Assal Habibi, research scientist and associate professor of psychology here at the Institute, and with Professors Damasio and Ilari, she has been working on a multi-year landmark study in collaboration with the LA Phil's Youth Orchestra program, YOLA, and we'll hear a lot more about that. It's gotten a lot of attention worldwide. And Professor Josh Kun is the newly named USC Vice Provost for the Arts. His side hustle, interim dean of the USC Thornton School of Music. I'm not exaggerating, am I? It is a side hustle, because he's also a longtime faculty member of the Annenberg School for Communication. He, as many of you know, was a 2016 MacArthur Fellow, an award-winning author, cultural historian, and makes fascinating connections between music and popular culture, popular music and culture all over the world. So again, if I were to really tell you about all they do, we would be here forever. Let's start though with Professor Damasio. Your just kind of general thoughts, because I know this is you've written books about this, but briefly, the connection, the relationship between music, feelings, and emotions.
Very good. Simple question.
I think so.
So, first, let me add my welcome to all of you. It's a great pleasure to have you in this hall. It's a great pleasure to have Gail here. I'm an old listener of yours and a great listener of KUSC, so it's welcome to all of that part of our panel. It's a great pleasure to be here, because this is a sort of hallowed hall for us. You know, it takes some gumption to tell a university that is trying to hire you that you will only come to that university if you will build a hall for us. And that's exactly what we told USC way back. And we said, yeah, we may come if you do the hall we want, and if we have a hall where we can play music with the sound that we want to hear. And that was the second part of the bargain, is that the hall was designed by Yasu Toyota, and Yasu Toyota is the greatest music acoustician in the world. He's designed Disney Hall, for example, designed the acoustics, of course. And so it's a great, great pleasure to have you here and to call a little bit of attention to this gem that you've got in this place. It's very few seats, but we're comfortable, and we can listen to the music the way you want. And by the way, I'm going to ask you to look at the floor of the stage, which looks dirty, but it's not. But it looks used, you know. Plenty of great people have played here, all the way from great pianists playing jazz or classical music to our dear friend Yo-Yo Ma. So all of these scratches that you see here have a significance, a historical significance for us. And just one last word, which is part of the secret of the acoustics. One of the secrets is, of course, from the height of the hall. The other comes from the fact that this is really like a drum. Underneath this stage, there are 3 feet of hollow space. So that's why you can hear this as opposed to a flat sound if it would be just solid cement, which it is not. So, Gail, your question. I think I remember it. It had to do with the
Music, emotions, feelings. How does that all work? So that's all.
It's very simple. Music has this uncanny power to provoke emotions and the respective feelings. And what is particular about it is that it is so universal in relation to the music, in relation to where the music comes from, and in relation to the style of the music. So it doesn't make any difference whether you're listening to Shostakovich or Chopin, whether you're listening to classical music or jazz or pop, music coming from around us or from the east or the west, it doesn't make any difference. It has that uncanny power to provoke emotions and the respective feelings. Why is this important? Well, you would say there are plenty of things that can provoke emotions and feelings in us, and it doesn't have to be through music. Of course, the things we see, a landscape we love, or a dish you're going to eat tonight at dinner may provoke very strong emotions as well. But there's something special about music in the sense that it doesn't, first of all, it's extremely universal in relation to the kinds of music, in relation to the kinds of sounds, and it is truly out of an abstraction. It doesn't need to tell a story necessarily. The sounds don't need to be identified.
That.
Sorry. And what was this? It was not planned. Did it provoke an emotion? You didn't need to. Anyway, so just to make the point that there's something far wider in terms of music, in terms of the power to provoke emotions and really provoke those emotions coming out of the true abstraction. One more word or two about emotions and feelings, because this is something that you can take home and think about in case you don't know it, is that there is a very big difference between emotion and feeling. And many people use the two words as if they were interchangeable, but they're not. When you talk about emotion, you talk about something that really is visible in the face, in the posture of an individual. So if I would now have a strong emotion, or even a weak emotion, you could see it in my face, you could see it in my posture, you could hear it in the tone of my voice if I were to speak. And it doesn't make any difference whether it would be fear or longing or joy or sadness. You would have a way of detecting what is going on in my mind. You would know something about me. If I have a feeling, including the feeling that corresponds to that emotion, on the contrary, that is entirely private. You cannot see my feelings. You can guess them, but you cannot see them, you cannot appreciate them. So this distinction between emotions which are public, I like to talk about emotions as theatricals. Emotion is, to begin with, theatrical. It's something that is directed to the outside and is executed in our bodies, whether it is with our striated muscles that move our bones or the muscles that are inside of our viscera. It's something that is acted on, and that in great part it is visible to an outsider. What you feel after that emotion, what comes immediately on the heels of the emotion, is entirely private. You cannot know about it. And one last word. Emotions produce feelings, of course, but there are other ways of producing feelings that I want you to hear about. And those are so-called homeostatic feelings, and they come out of the way in which our organisms regulate our lives. So our lives are constantly being managed in such a way that they stay on balance, that they keep to a certain equilibrium, and the governance has to do with homeostasis. One allows our organisms to maintain themselves and survive. And those are the primary feelings that we have, the feelings that in fact started in evolution long before there were emotions, and the feelings that come after emotions. So those are feelings that you all have, and let me just outline some of the names of those feelings, and you will realize how important they are. Hunger, thirst, pain, and one feeling which is a composite, which is feelings of existence, the things that come out of our own breath, out of our own heartbeat, and out of the temperature of our body. So all of these are very distinct. They existed before the emotional feelings that came, of course, including the emotional feelings that are produced by music. So keep it all in context, because when you think about the powers of music, it's something that we're all interested in. Part of it has to do with the fact that we are ourselves like musical instruments. We are being played upon by our ideas, by our minds, and as a result, we have those feelings. Okay?
I love that image. That's beautiful. It's a perfect segue to some of the work that you're doing, Josh, which is talk about people with hunger and thirst. You have done a big focus on migrant communities and music, and the sort of social impact of music writ large. How do you see music as a bridge between cultures, as you have really done in your work?
Sure. I was actually thinking about a scene that I come back to a lot in my life and in my work, which is story that Jerry Lever told about his early days in Los Angeles as a white Jewish teenager, originally from Baltimore, when he was working as a busboy not far from here, downtown at Clifton's Cafeteria in the early 1950s. And he describes this moment on a shift where he goes back into the kitchen and he sees one of his coworkers, an African-American short order cook, who's on a break, and he's listening to Hunter Hancock on the radio, the white radio DJ who was famous in LA for playing exclusively black music. And Hancock is playing Jimmy Witherspoon's Ain't Nobody's Business. And Lieber's watching the short order cook, listening to Jimmy Witherspoon. And he says this: "At that very moment, I was transported into a realm of mystical understanding. The light came on. Maybe it was the power and absolute confidence of the voice. Maybe it was the lyrics. I don't know. Whatever it was, I was never the same again. The door had opened. I had entered his world." So there's that magic that you opened with. That is part of the mystical moment that Lieber's talking about, but it's all linked to the series of emotions and feelings that are happening in the brain, that make their way through the body, and that opening incredible images of the brain in the act of listening, which I'd never seen before. And I turned to Assal, it was so emotional looking at those images, extraordinarily beautiful. And on the one hand, I wanted to know scientifically what was happening, but on the other hand, I was like, please don't tell me what's happening scientifically, because I was just so moved by what I was watching. And so one thing that I always think about, Gail, to come back to that question is, you know, as we all listen to music in different forms every day, dozens of times a day, hundreds of times a day, every single one of those acts is this opportunity, because listening to music is always a relational act, is at the kind of core of the way that I think about this, which is to say that somebody's blood and somebody's breath, somebody's cells, somebody's tissue ends up in moving through the throat, through their voice, or through their breath into an instrument that moves through the air, that creates vibrations that move through the air, that enter our ears. What Roland Barthes famously said was that the kind of great interface with the other enters our ears, and our brain translates it, indexes it, describes it at times of what we might call music. It then impacts our bodies and our lives, and then that sound from somebody else's blood, tissue, and breath becomes our song. That's my song. that song becomes the soundtrack to our lives, marks the most important, most delicate, most sensitive, most brutal, most joyous moments in our lives, and that's mine, but it's not mine. Everything that's mine is somebody else's. Everything that defines the self comes from somebody else. And so I think if we can start our work there, both studying music, studying the brain from that point of relationality, but you don't have to be a musician or a musicologist or a scientist to think about it that way. This is where music's great potential for understanding the relationality of all of us, that we're all connected, we're all interconnected, we're all linked, and every act of listening to music is an opportunity to understand those linkages and connections.
Wow, and when, you decide something is my song, you want to hear it a million times, which is another thing I'll ask Dr. Damasio about sometime, but why do we need to hear it a million times? Just a quick follow-up to that. So manifesting this idea of music bringing us together, you have actually studied how migrants and refugees are using music to change their lives. Can you talk briefly about your work at the Mexican border?
Sure, yeah, this is research I've been doing for the past several years for a book that has been interviews with people who have been classified as migrants or classified as refugees during the 21st century and have traveled all over the world to meet with folks to talk about the role of music in their lives. And so much of it is both about these stories that were already mentioned of music as a kind of healing, music as medicine, music as a way of coping with grief. But also in so many of these cases, particularly for musicians in detention, music is a way of remaining human. When your humanity is being stripped from you, when it is taken from you, there's a long, of course, global history of music as a way of rehumanizing or making sure that the capture of one's humanity is rendered impossible because the music returns you to yourself. And that's been, I think, a really important theme in this work, but also in terms of migrants and refugees who are negotiating new cultures and new contexts. Music is this really important interface of both maintaining tradition, maintaining identity, and then figuring out how much you want to integrate and how much you want to assimilate. It's an open question. How much do you want to do that cross-cultural work? And it's not always this kind of beautiful moment of togetherness. It's often a moment of saying, no, I'm not going to play that music. I'm going to play this music. And that means something to me politically. So it's a really complicated and rich field. But in this work, yes, a lot of it started at the U.S.-Mexico border, but has taken me to working with Syrian refugees in Berlin, African refugees in Lampedusa, Italy, and on and on.
It points out so beautifully, how basic this musical impulse is for us and how much it means to us. It's who we are, it's where we came from, it's what we want to be. And I want to find out a little bit more about what's actually happening in the brain with all of these contexts. And Assal, you have done a lot of work on literally what is happening in the brain when we listen to music. And talk a little bit about that.
Sure. You saw the images, and it's often said when you read science papers about music that music listening and playing is like fireworks in the brain. There are many areas of the brain that are involved, from basic auditory areas to motor regions. But we know also very well that music does hijack the emotional system of the brain, the same system of pleasure and anticipation that we have for food or for anything that is pleasurable. Listening to music that you enjoy does activate that region. And if you are willing to, for example, pay for the music, you see more activation of these striatum and limbic areas of the brain, subcortical regions, kind of older regions of the brain through evolution that correspond and interact with the auditory regions. When we play music together, there is even this phenomena is more pronounced because there is this interpersonal synchrony. So entrainment of the neural synchrony between individuals. We all tend to synchronize to an external beat. And when we play music together, there's actually that synchrony among musicians in terms of their auditory motor regions. They synchronously activating together. And one of the very interesting things is that synchrony actually does correspond to some prosocial behavior. This work has been shown that, for example, in babies, if you move them synchronously to music, they tend to be more prosocial towards the caregiver who moves them. Beatriz and I have done this work following children, and one of the very interesting things that we saw is that when children drum together or clap together, the more synchronized they are with each other, the more prosocial they are towards each other. Prosocial meaning they're more willing to share, they're more willing to help, they're more compassionate towards each other. Everything we want a child, we want them to learn. It seems that participating in that musical activity that has one beat, one rhythm, an anticipation unfolding of the melody and harmony does engage our brain in a system that brings us together the same way that Josh was describing, that there is that interconnection. The interconnection is not just kind of our thinking of interconnection, but really just brain synchronizing to each other.
Literal interconnection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody is really liking this, feeling very emotional about it. So, Beatriz, you've done a lot of this work with infants and children. What other ways are you seeing music impact them?
So, listening, I think, is one of the first things that children do. And it's interesting that babies come into the world. We know that they come super well equipped to hear music, to process music. But there's a lot of learning that happens in the course of childhood and adolescence. And some of the things that we've learned, as Assal pointed out, we looked at studies that focus on music education or being part of a music program of some sort. And we see some benefits like prosocial behaviors. We also see with very young children, self-regulation, right? Being able to take turns. If you have a preschooler around you, you know what I mean, right? Or saying, okay, it's not your turn now, it's somebody else who's gonna do that. And so these are some of the things that there's plenty of research, and our own studies have shown this, that, there's executive function that young kids are developing. But as they develop and grow in culture, there are a couple of things that start changing. They become more analytical in relationship to music. They also show preferences. They show, that preschooler who maybe would dance at a street festival, when they become a middle schooler, a high schooler, they will never be caught doing that in front of the audience. But that doesn't mean that they don't appreciate music. On the contrary, that's the time when they listen to a lot of music. They have a lot of preferences, and music becomes a badge of identity, a way to express emotions, a way to express ideas, a way to relate with other people. So there's quite a lot that we know from the developmental literature involving music and children. And the last thing I guess I wanted to say is that, the teenagers in particular, going up the developmental scale, when they get to the teenage years, that's the time when we listen to the most music in our lives. We have a lot of time. Teenagers have time. They have their earbuds on, and they're, getting all this information. What we know now is that in later adulthood, many of us go back to that music that was part of our teenage years, early adulthood. There's something about that. They call those reminiscence bops, and you really go back, and that's really important. And so there's something to be said about, music in our brains during the course of development. There's a lot that we still need to learn, but these are some of the things we've learned so far.
You mentioned executive function, and tell us a little bit about what that is. And I gather that impulse control is actually a part of that, which is pretty amazing. It's to connect music to impulse control.
That's right. So there are several studies, not just our own, showing that, and we see this a lot, especially in the early years, in the preschool years, that children develop, cognitive flexibility, impulse control, all through, participation in music. And the question is, why would music do that? There are lots of things that happen in learning music. Well, if you want to play with other people, we have to entrain, as Assal was mentioning. You also need to learn to take turns, because maybe you're playing an instrument, somebody's singing at the same time. There are lots of things that we do in music learning, which is you might sing a song in your head, right? Maybe some of you have experienced this, and you're in a busy place, you can't really sing out, or you don't want to sing out loud, but you're singing in your head. We teach kids to do that. That's also a way to regulate an impulse to sing, but now it's all in there, it's all happening. So these are some of the possible explanations as to why music has a repetition, right? We have to repeat and practicing is hard. There's all of these things that we know about music learning, but we also know that they help develop these skills. Or
You have a fun job.
I do.
Well, I want to hear about this groundbreaking study that you have worked on with YOLA, with the Youth Orchestra of Los Angeles, which many of you know is inspired by the El Sistema program, and Gustavo Dudamel made it contingency of his accepting his job at the LA Philharmonic that we would start a youth orchestra program in LA. So maybe start with Assal. What were your goals for the study? When did it all begin?
Wow, it began a long time ago because one of the participants is now 17 years old and a research assistant in my labs. And he was 6 years old when we started.
Wow.
We started in 2012. Beatriz and I had been thinking about wanting to look at impact of music, really community-based music programs for children, knowing that these opportunities are not available for every child. And if we can show scientifically that there are changes not only in their cognition and their academic achievement, but actually in their brain, we may have a really strong case to argue for the resources that need to be put for music education. So we started with the support of Antonio and Hannah here, and basically telling us, well, go do this. Sounds like really complex. Go for it. We worked with YOLA, Youth Orchestra of Los Angeles, and LA Philharmonic. We started studying children when they were 6 years old and followed them for 8 years. Every year they came to our laboratory here. They went inside the MRI scanner. They have had electrodes put on their heads. And for us to better understand what does learning music do to their brain, we had comparison groups of children who were age matched, who were doing other things in music. They were doing sports or other activities. It's a long study. We're not going to cover all the results, but some of the things that Beatriz touched on, I think to me were really interesting, because not only we saw observation of getting better at musical skills that we expect at them, also better at speech and language, skills that depend on sound, but not only we saw impulse control in terms of their behavior, but changes in their brain, not in the structure of the auditory areas, but the structures in the frontal lobe, more active engagement of the frontal regions of the brain, which are responsible for decision-making and impulse control in these children who have had music training, and more integration between their brain areas, the left and the right side of their hemispheres being more robustly connected as a result of music training. So it was a long study. We are always delighted to work with community-based programs. We have a study going on with Colburn Community School right now, and all of it just to say that quality music education and art education is a right of every child. And I think as a society, as a city, we should strive to bring that. And we do see benefits. Everything we want to try to learn, impulse control, compassion, empathy, seems to be byproducts that we can implement.
Beatriz, what, if anything, surprised you about some of these results?
I don't know if it surprised me, but one of the things that was very touching was we work with predominantly a Latino community here in Los Angeles, and first of all, how welcoming the community was. So one of the strategies that we had every year, we would go back to the community and say, this is what we found this year. This is the research that we've done, and we offered, the kids did campus tours. We try to keep them engaged and build this relationship with them. But what was interesting, that there was a year we were a little bit late in visiting, and they called us up and said, what's going on? Why aren't you coming back and telling us what happened in year 3? We're waiting for you. So it was interesting that when we were there were lots of parents who shared, by year 3, we knew that they had been here. We had been to their programs. We had gotten to know the children quite well. We would get advice. I got advice on, how many children I should have, or that I should cut my hair in a certain way. So that was very nice. But also, they asked for our advice in terms of, what is a college tour like? Or what is, can you help us? My school is giving too much homework. Should I talk to the school? So really feeling that we were part of their lives. I think to me, I've done a lot of research with children in different places, but this was the place, perhaps due to the design, but it was great to see that they felt welcome, that we were, part of their life. It didn't feel like we're cutting their heads open or, because we got questions like that in the beginning. Families asked, are you going to cut their head? No, we don't do that. So there was a lot that we had to, work through, Assal and I. The first 2 years were quite interesting. Our recruitment, we sat in a lot of football fields. We can tell you all about soccer fields in Los Angeles. We know all of them. Getting people to participate. So building community for me was one of the most extraordinary things of this project, aside from, of course, all the findings that we had.
And the findings are so comprehensive and remarkable that I recommend that you do some looking online about what BCI has been doing in this area, and we really are just touching on it. But Josh, you already heard Assal give a broad hint that more kids should be exposed to music in schools on a daily basis. What can be done to make this a bit more democratic? There's a dichotomy of the breakthroughs in neuroscience and creativity in the field of studying music on the brain just in the last, 15, 20 years, thanks to Dr. Damasio and his staff and others. And yet funding for the arts in schools is not doing well. The message doesn't seem to be getting across.
How am I going to solve all that?
Yeah, right now. You have about, Minnie tells me we have about 2 minutes.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I think about it in terms of, I defer on the brain front and scientific front to my colleagues, but, in so much of my work, it's been trying to make arguments for, again, the kind of value of both music education and music listening, and music as a model for non-musical, if that even exists. Maybe it doesn't exist, but let's say for now, non-musical actions and behaviors. And so one of the things that I'm really interested in, I did a project several years ago in San Francisco. There was a partnership between San Francisco Public Library and SF MoMA, where I set up a group of 5 musicians who had never played together before, from totally different totally different cultural backgrounds, totally different genres and styles, and asked them to show up at branch libraries across San Francisco with no previous actions together, and gave them a piece of historic San Francisco sheet music and put it in front of them, in front of an audience. And the show was us watching them figure out what to do. In some cases, there was very little playing, and it was an hour of getting to know each other and talking. And even as you saw the quartet at the beginning, the piece began long before they started playing, right? It began in the rehearsal, arguably it began this morning, but certainly you saw them, fiddling before they played, getting seated, fixing the hair. And I wanted to learn what rehearsals can teach us about, kind of how, let me put it this way, how rehearsals can be scaled into other kinds of social problem solving. So it was about watching musicians do what they do every single day, which is figure out, as individuals with totally different backgrounds and different experiences and different days before the moment they showed up, how they're going to make something together that's bigger than all of them, and yet needs each of their difference. And you do that by listening, by knowing when to be quiet, knowing when to solo, knowing when not to be a leader, knowing when to be a leader. These are all scalable and translatable skills that music teaches us for more equitable and democratic social life. And then the other area that I've been doing, that right now I'm in the middle of, which has been, I use this metaphor a lot in my work, of the crossfader, which is a horizontal toggle at the bottom of a traditional DJ mixer that allows you to take a song that's on input 1 and a song that's on input 2, two totally different songs, and find that spot with the horizontal toggle, that point of connection that allows you to see what one song has in common with the other in order to create a new mix and a new song that actually is only created because nothing is erased. So that what makes the two inputs different is actually what creates the new mix. And so with the support of the Omidyar Foundation, right now I'm trying to translate that into looking at political division and cultural change across the United States. So we have a pilot grant to do 3 short films in 3 cities across the US, going through some version of political change or cultural, various kinds of cultural tension. And I'm taking 2 musicians in each city of 2 totally different backgrounds. And one is on input 1, one is on input 2. I'm the crossfader. We have a conversation, and then they improvise and play something together live on the spot. And we talk about the tensions and the changes in their communities and how music can potentially become a way of thinking through it and ultimately completely beyond it.
What a beautiful metaphor. Just incredible work that you're doing. So, Dr. Damasio, you've put so much time and expertise into studying music on the brain. What are the implications of how we should think about music education and think about music on the radio, invest in this to help kids, to help them grow as Beatriz has seen? What's the advocacy piece, you know?
Well, I think that it's obvious that we should continue and should do more of it. And I think that you heard several very distinct examples of how the listening to music and the practice of music has an influence on how your behavior matures. We're not thinking only about the brain. This is really about the relations of the brain and the body together. And in fact, even a lot of the things that you were seeing there on those scans are things that are happening in the brain, but they're happening in the brain operating together with the rest of the organism. In fact, one of the things that is most important in the new lessons of neuroscience is that this is not about the brain alone. It's about the brain operating together with the living organism, because in the end, the brain is a servant to the rest of the organism. The reason why we got a brain in evolution was not to, create beautiful images that you can show on the spot. It's actually to help regulate life. Life is the controller here, and having a life that is well lived is, of course, what we need to strive for. So I think that these lessons mean that we need to do more of it. We need to realize that beyond just the listening that we can have for pleasure when we're listening to your great programs in the evening, there's something that needs to come after the listening, or can come after the listening, which has to do with reflecting on what you heard. And that can, it's a great space for creativity, because when you reflect on a piece of music that you have just heard, your thoughts can take you in many different directions. But having that moment of reflection afterwards sort of prolongs what music has done for you. And beyond the immediate pleasure or the immediate concern that you had out of listening to the music, you can have a post-factum moment in which you reflect upon it, and that reflection can take many directions. You can reflect on something that happened to you on that day, or on something that is happening in your life, on the life of a friend of yours. And all of that is part of the overall impact of music. Goes pretty much along the lines of what you just mentioned, this impact that comes from when the music is taken in a social setting as opposed to individually.
And Assal, as you supervise all this research, are you thinking about advocacy too? Are you thinking about how to communicate how important it is to spread this around?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, events like this is a great opportunity to communicate findings. We often do workshops and writings beyond just scientific publications, but also advocacy, not only in terms of education, but in terms of healthcare and mental health. We are doing some work now with older adults and participation in musical activities for preserving cognitive abilities, but also just well-being. If we are working with groups of older adults at the early stages of dementia, and how we can use music as a way of helping with agitation and anxiety. So I think I see that part of my responsibility, even though when you train as a scientist, they don't train you as an advocate, but I think it's part of our work to show not only in health, mental health, but also education, and then work with communities through the programs we work. We often bring children and their families here. They do a performance. We talk about their findings to their parents, because for them, that's the piece that they need to connect to, for themselves to ask. I mean, each one of us can ask for more music education as part of our school, as part of each older adults. They get exercise as part of the healthcare benefits, why can't they get music and art as part of their benefits? I think as a society, we should also advocate based on the science that we have established presence of more music in our lives.
I'm going to turn it over to you for a couple of questions, but I really have to just bear down on one thing. You said music and dementia. What are you finding there?
Well, there's a lot of work in terms of what I just said at how we can use music to help individuals who are at early stages of dementia. And there's a lot of agitation, anxiety, both for caregivers and the patient themselves. So whether listening to music, but also musical activities that are simple, dyads, singing, or small choirs for caregivers, and how we can just use such a small investment to just bring some wellness. We're not advocating that music can slow dementia or cure dementia, but as a way of how we can use it as a toolbox to help for well-being. We're also doing some work in my lab. Sarah Hennessy is one of our graduate students who is using music that is nostalgic, and see if we can use, each one of you can think about 10 seconds of music that you listen to and is meaningful to you and it takes you back to your college years. So whether we can use those specific individuals' pieces of music to help individuals with dementia to retrieve memories in kind of a bypassing just the memory and cognition system, and kind of use the emotional potency of music to help retrieving memories that are pleasant and beautiful.
Music is powerful. There's no question about it. Do we have any questions from the audience? We do, and we have some microphones coming your way. Yes.
I know that people with early dementia respond to music. Do you know what happens as dementia progresses, like in the middle stages or at the later stages that people respond to music?
I think the research in that is progressing. There's a lot of work, as I said, with early stages of dementia because it's easier to work with those patients, having them listen to music, having them participate. There's some work that is just beginning on late stages of dementia, but I think for all of that is just, it's kind of an infrastructure to help wellness and take kind of the anxiety and agitation away as a result of like experiencing the kind of the loss of memory and loss of cognitive systems.
I was wondering if that calming still happens when people progress.
Yeah, because music continues to have, especially if it's the music that is pleasant, it would continue to have that regulation of the emotion system and stress.
The brain doesn't deteriorate, is that what he said?
Well, it's kind of a long process with dementia, different types of dementia, and also with the emotion regulation part of the brain does not deteriorate as fast as the memory system of the brain. And
Yeah.
Yeah, we can add,
Yes.
just to add that one of the things that is most critical in dementia is loss of memory. And the loss of memory is related to some very specific regions of the brain, and those are the ones that tend to be more affected, although the pace of it varies with the kind of dementia, with the kind of process that you've got, and there are several very different dementias. But it's quite obvious that even in normal individuals that don't have any disease, the memories that are recollected after listening to a piece of music, especially music that goes back into the past of your life, is recalled in a very, very different way from something that is recalled after you ask a question verbally. So you have a greater facility with things that come via the music path. So that's one of the things that we can take advantage of in individuals with dementia. So I think that your point is very important, is that the areas of the brain that are related and are most often affected with dementia are different from the areas that are primarily involved in the processing of music and even in the recalling of music.
Fascinating. Yes.
I'm just curious. Music had been used as like a morphine for me. I'm an advanced stage cancer survivor. When I was in the hospital for over a month, one of those days I was refused to have more morphine because I've exhausted the morphine allocation for a specific time frame. Then the doctor said, no, we cannot give you more morphine, and you have to wait for at least an hour or two before we have that. We can give you more morphine. And in the meantime, I blasted myself the room in my room in the hospital with music, some Mozart music. I cannot remember what, but I have the whole stuff at CDs. Now, I somehow forgot my pain, because my pain was actually when the doctor was asking me, what's your level of pain? 1 to 10, 10 being the most painful. I said 20. And I am wondering, why is it that I forgot pain? And is it because I'm a classical pianist, and I'm wondering if it can only affect to, like the morphine is music is a morphine to people who can focus on the music, or just people who are ordinary people in general. So it's wonderful that happened to you, given the problem you were coping with. But no, I think that the power that music had in your case was exactly to create your own morphine. So what happened is that as you listened to music, you were able to generate inside your organism equivalents to the morphine. And in fact, in some cases, something very close to an opioid. And so you were generating in your brain, in your organism as a whole, you were generating your own morphine. And that, by the way, is one of the reasons why people can get addicted to music, exactly the same way that you can get addicted to a drug, precisely because it acts like a drug. So you're giving a very vivid account of what it is to listen to music. In your situation, you were quite desperate for a very special reason, but the mechanism is still the same. So the doctor refused the morphine, but you found your own, and more power to you. Congratulations.
Mozart heals. Yes, we have a question over here. Yeah.
I think you touched on the topic of reminiscent thought, or as we get older, we kind of return to music that we liked as youth. I find that for myself to be true even with music that I didn't like my sister's hair metal bands. I'm curious if that's a phenomenon you found in your research, and if it's just a function of nostalgia, or if there are actual physical changes in the brain that change our tastes as we age.
Well, I can speak to the nostalgia and the reminiscent bump. Usually the reminiscent bump is defined as kind of adolescent, teenage years, between ages to 10 to 17. The music you listen to during those years is going to be the music you'll listen to during your older age. And that's been shown replicated in many studies. One of the reasons is think very important events happen in our lives during those years. You fall in love for the first time, graduate from high school the first time, you find a job the first time. So kind of those very significant events of our life has a soundtrack of music that goes with it. And it seems that we drive to go back to those soundtracks that has emotional potency later in life. I don't know, Beatriz, if you have anything to add.
I guess what I would add, I'm a violinist by training. I don't play much anymore. I do more research than play. But to this day, and I experienced this a lot during the pandemic, listening to music that I played in orchestra for a long time, and I can still remember the fingerings. Sometimes and my kids are saying, what are you doing? I'm like, well, just, listening to music in my mind and actually playing my violin, right? But it's going back all those years. So there's something that stayed, and maybe, I don't know, the brain correlates to that, but I can tell you that I see myself doing that a lot. And it's all things that, I don't know when I play that symphony, but I still remember that part and what was difficult and whatnot, so.
Why, just last night, I was too nervous to sleep, and I sat down at the piano, and I could play about half of a well-tempered clavier prelude. Now, I wouldn't have wanted to play it for anyone because I stopped dead at a certain point and couldn't go on, but I couldn't believe that I remembered as much as I remembered, yeah. So it seems like it really sort of has its own life in the brain, where the music sits. Yeah. Well, I want to thank our amazing panelists. We could go on about this subject for years, and hopefully we'll have another opportunity to come back. We have music for you, though, and that's going to be really special. So thank you, panelists. You can go back to your seat. This is kind of apropos, because the music we're going to hear is sort of nostalgic music by Antonin Dvorak. He was in his mid-50s, and many of you know that he spent about 4 years here in America, and he was the head of what I think eventually became the Juilliard School, but was then called the National Conservatory in New York. And he obviously had a worldwide reputation, but he was kind of homesick. And so he went home for the summer, a couple of summers, and one of those summers, thinking back to his time in New York and realizing he wants to be in Czechoslovakia, that's where his home is, he started writing a couple of string quartets. And he had some trouble getting going, had a little bit of a dry spell, and then this kind of explosion of beautiful melodic work. What's kind of interesting about the music that you'll hear, and we're going to hear the third and fourth movements of one of his last quartets, the quartet number 13, is that you'll hear that it's made up of short musical motifs. It's not some of the long, lustrous melodies that we hear in, say, the New World Symphony or some of his other earlier works. And one wonders if he had lived beyond the age of 63, I think is when he died, if he would have taken music, his own music, in a different direction. So it's Dvorak looking back, realizing where his home is and where his heart is. And I want to welcome once again the Ivory Quartet, who, as you know, are based here in Los Angeles, a winner of some major awards. And they're going to perform for us, and they're also going to tell us a little bit about how their brains got into music.
Is this working? Hello? Okay. So I just want to say thanks to everyone for watching our performance today. We're going to briefly introduce ourselves. So I'm Eric Chang. I play violin. I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois. And right now I'm in my first year of graduate certificate at USC. So how I got into the violin or music was I first heard a very good high school string quartet when I was in middle school perform at my middle school. And ever since then, I just fell in love with the sound of how the quartet sounds and just the violin in general. So that's how it was for me.
Hi, my name is Vikram. I'm a violinist from San Jose, California. And I've just been involved with music for as long as I know. So it's my favorite thing to do, play for people. So.
Hi, my name is Maddie. I'm from San Diego. I'm in my master's first year, and my mom actually made me play cello, but actually watching her play her instrument inspired me to start loving music.
Hi everyone. Is this working? No. Hi everyone, my name is Jenny. I'm from Taiwan. I came around 7-8 years ago, and I've been at USC from undergrad, and I just graduated my master's. And I think I just encountered a lot of good teachers that has opened up the doors to a lot of possibilities in music and how creative you can be in it. And that's just how I really got hooked into music. Yeah.
So thank you all. We're going to perform 2 movements of the Dvorak String Quartet number 13.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ivory Quartet. Have a wonderful tour of France. And boy, are we blessed to have you performing for us today. And it reminds us what a jewel we have down the block, the USC Thornton School of Music. Just outstanding musicians. And KUSC loves to partner with the Thornton School. I want to thank the USC Brain and Creativity Institute. This really, truly has been a labor of joy for KUSC to put this together, a dream. And Assal, I can't thank you enough. We conjured this up in a phone conversation, 5 months ago, and here we are today. Just thrilled. I want to thank our other panelists, Beatriz and Josh. Just incredible to hear some of the work you're doing. I want to thank the KUSC staff who worked very hard to put this together. Mary and Liz and Minnie and all of my colleagues who are here today, and James, of course, as well, and our Dornsife crew who made the live stream possible. And speaking of the live stream, yes, we've been live streaming, but today's event will also be available on the KUSC YouTube channel in just a day or two. So if you know any folks who are interested in music as morphine, music as an incredible addiction that we are all very proud to have, tell them about the YouTube channel. And thanks for being here today.